Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our latest webinar from ATI. We're here with our partners at QuickTrack to deliver a webinar to inform you of what is currently going on with CMMC. Just for a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you do have any questions, please place them in the Q&A section of Zoom. If you don't see that on your menu bar, please click the three dots that say more. It may be under there for you. We do have the slides posted for you to view and follow on if you would like. I'm going to put the link to the page where those slides are posted here in the chat. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded. At that same website, we will be posting the recording of this webinar. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Derek White from QuickTrack to go ahead and get started on this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate the intro there for having us on for what is the first of a series of monthly webinars on different topics specific to mostly CMMC and those requirements and what's different. So yes, thank you again. My name is Derek White. I am the Chief Product Operating Officer and co-founder here at Beryllium and QuickTrack. And with me also have George Perez Diaz, our Director of Advisory Services. You may, if you were on some of these webinars last year when we did some of this, these faces might look a little familiar. George and I were able to share some tidbits. I think it was November of last year, and here we are already in the end of August. So crazy how fast time goes. And so we're going to go through a couple things today. I'd like to introduce George for a second. George, if you could just do a really high level briefing of what people can see on the screen, and then we'll hop into the presentation and some of the details from there.
Yes, thank you for having me, everybody. Hey, TI and folks. George Perez Diaz, like Derek mentioned, Director of Advisory Services. We have a fantastic team of CMMC and compliance professionals leading organizations from not knowing where CUI is to, alas, we're ready for a C3PAO or a DIPCAC assessment. I've been in the DoD space almost my entire life, over 25 years. Now started building networks as an Air Force enlisted person and training personnel on how to manage and maintain networks. Then worked with the Joint Chief of Staff for a while, supporting their nuclear command and control mission. Then decided to go work for the private sector there for a while. And in 2016, when D47012 dropped, that's when I was introduced to NIST 10171. I manage a very large program for a prime contractor where we scoped out under 3,000 employees out of a 50,000 plus employee global company. I was blessed with the opportunity to manage that program, was blessed again with the opportunity to lead that organization through DIPCAC High assessment. And that's when I decided to become a consultant and help many organizations rather than just one. Since last time we've met, we've gone through a number of CMMC level 2 assessments, which is exciting news and some lessons that we'll share during this exercise, and looking forward to getting into it. Thank you, Derek.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, lots of experience here just to cover through today's thing, and then in the future webinars that we're going to do, we're bringing some additional third parties in to provide their perspective as well. So look forward for more information on that coming soon from the good folks at ATI. So yeah, a couple of things we're gonna get into. If you saw the registration, is we need to talk about the here and now, and also what that landscape's going to look like coming up. Because if you were on some of the events from last November, and here we are coming up on Labor Day, things have definitely changed. But before we can talk about the here and now, we do have to, of course, go back through some of the important aspects that happened in the past. So, George, I'm going to let you do most of the discussion points here. Yeah, obviously we have some things to add from clarity, but just from a perspective of where things were with the 32 CFR Part 170, we'll just run through a couple of these things.
Yeah, so like you've mentioned, we've met last time with some of you folks and some of you that we're just meeting. Nice to meet you. Welcome to the family. So since November, we have now 32 CFR Part 170 become effective. So what does that mean is that now organizations can go if they choose to do so and get a CMMC level 2 assessment by a C3PAO. So no longer are you bound and or restricted by the the Joint Surveillance Program, the JSVAs, which we're supposed to convert into a CMMC Level 2, and they have. Now you can go select identify your preferred C3PAO, go through the assessment, and get CMMC certified. Two differences there. The 32 CFR is actually a legal requirement. Congress said, hey, DoD, federal government, we need to do better protecting our systems. We need to do better at sharing information and protecting that information as we share it with the private sector. And the 32 CFR and the CMMC program is the regulatory requirement on how the DoD decided to implement and meet their obligations from that legal requirement, if you will. So as we have been saying for a while now, 32 CFR is waiting for its cousin, 48 CFR, so that we can now call it final and effective. And it will be the way in which the DoD will continue to meet the requirements to protect the CUI, the control and classified information that inevitably they have to share with the private sector so that we can continue building goods and services for them with them. It will likely continue to be the DFARS clause 7021, 252.204, 7021. And it just quote unquote, it expands DFARS 7012, which as we all know, it says that we have to protect CUI, meaning adequate security translated into NIST 800-171. Adequate security also meant that if you're using a cloud service provider or it's a cloud service offering like QuickTrack Managed Enclave, that solution has to be met federal moderate or equivalent, and also extends and adds to the DFARS 7020, which before 2020, when DFARS 7020 and 2019 came out, when the DoD said, hey, I need to do an audit of your environment to validate that you have implemented NIST 800-171, organizations such as my previous employer, we could have said, no, thank you, we're too busy. We cannot come hang out with you for a week, DoD and your 12 assessors. Come again. Well, they said, no, that's not going to happen anymore. We need to have a better visibility into our supply chain. And that's where 7020 came about. It was given to DoD, it is given to DoD the right to audit. And it says that you're going to make your personnel, your systems, and your facilities available to the DoD whenever they need to do and validate that you're meeting the intent of those requirements. In addition to having the ability and authority to audit, they went ahead and started the CMMC program so that we can go from, yes, we're doing the right thing, DoD, trust us to show me the money, so to speak, show me the actual context that you have made improvements in your organization culturally and technically, and make the right investments to continue to protect CUI. There's a little bit more weight in the way in which we validate and verify with the DoD. Thank you, Derek, for sharing those. Because now, whenever you go into the SPRS system, the Supplier Performance Risk Management website, you will see that when you used to submit a SPRS score for NIST 800-171, it was pretty straightforward. You're doing it for your organization, for the network, for the enclave, or for a contract, and there was pretty much it, right? You say, yep, I'm 110 out of 110. And if you're not, you submit a poem. Now, when you click the tab to submit a CMMC assessment update or self affirmation, you get this bad boy here. You get some notification saying, hey, are you sure you're going to do this? Are you sure you're willing to include the information that you're about to? And if you go to the next one, then when you're good and ready to submit that score, you will be warned with a message that says that you are now agreeing to the liability under the False Claims Act. That's why I've been pretty intentional about calling out the importance of the affirming official. That person, that senior leader in your organization that says, yes, my organization, it's accurately representing their security and their SPRS score within the website, within the portal. And we are going to continue to meet the intent of the requirements for the next 12 months, and the score itself is accurate. So if you are the affirming official, make sure that you 100% understand what you are affirming to, what is the personal liability, not just for your company, but also again as a person, as a person signing the dotted lines before you get your organization and yourself into trouble. That's why more often than not, it's good to partner with a good C3PAO that you can trust, that you know they're going to validate your 110 controls, your 320 assessment requirements, and get that third-party affirmation and confidence that your system and your IT team and everybody that is behind you is indeed protecting the organization, the organizational operational risk before you endorse the organization. Anything else there, Derek?
No, I think now that's the obligation is to talk about the past and how important December was versus, like you said, now we can talk about the cousin that they have to coexist. And that's the program, that's the milestones, if you will, or dominoes, if you will, I guess probably a better way of saying it, of what had to happen before certain things happen. And now we can shift a little bit to what's on the horizon and what 48 CFR will mean to the whether you are been working on this for years and years, new contracts, there's applicability to your scenario here. Now you can better understand that. Hopefully, that's why we're here today, kicking off the moment in time look at what's coming. So yes, let's talk about 48 a little bit. And the number one question always is, oh, the timeline, like tell us when it's going to be this. And I'll let you walk through that a little bit on, and then we have a couple more bullets that will support that answer.
Yeah, sorry about that, Derek. About 3 years ago, I made it a point to not try to predict when this publications and requirements are going to come out. If anybody has been trying to predict this phase of CMMC is coming, and DFAR 7012 and 21 is coming, and 4832 CFR is coming at a particular date and time, you are inevitably being made a liar, and not intentional, right? It's because the process takes time. And the same is true for 48 CFR. In LinkedIn, I'm pretty active trying to give industry a little bit of myself and what we do and what we know, because we believe in the mission and fully support it. But one of the latest within the last 3 months, 2 months posts that I mentioned was that the 1 October, right? And you'll hear a lot of people getting pretty upset when, George, why are you saying October 1st? I'm not saying it's October 1st. I'm saying what the DoD said, that it was going to be final and effective in 2020. And I love the fact that in 2020, DoD thought that by October 1st was when 48 CFR was going to be final and effective, meaning that it was going to show up in contracts as a clause, similarly to how you see DFAR 7012 and 7020 today. But I love the consistency that we're very close to that date right now, right? Well, we know that the timeline is unknown, but what we do know is because of the time and the process is between October and February, very likely within those months. So expect the clause to be final by then, and then we'll get into the inevitable phased-in approach. How are we going to implement NIST 117? I'm sorry, CMMC. How is it going to be introduced and whatnot? Likely is going to be required before the fact. Do not forget, since 2017, we have seen many prime contractors asking you, are you CMMC ready? Or where are you with your CMMC readiness? Now that message, that question is going to be more targeted and specific, because rough estimate there, but likely you have 85+% of those prime contractors, the large enterprises, have been already CMMC level 2 certified. So if I am them and I am making sure that my CUI is protected, and I'm giving confidence to the DoD, the federal government, that I am intentional about protecting my CUI, I will expect the same of my supply chain. I'm not saying, hey, George, Derek, go ahead and get CMMC level 2 certified. But I want to get a pulse on, are you going to be ready? When it shows up in my contract, Am I going to have to shift and try to find a new supplier to do XYZ for me? Or I'm going to start doing that and identifying the suppliers that I know I can trust and I can count because either they have already reported 110 out of 110 for the last 4 years, or they've already told me in those questionnaires, yep, I am ready for a C3PAO and I'm scheduled to have my C3PAO assessment in November, December, February. And then what's going to happen to you if you're one of the suppliers that is not as aggressive or intentional about meeting the intent of those requirements? It's going to show up early, like I mentioned, likely, and the DoD reserves the right to make it part of the negotiation. And that has been the clear and consistent message since 2020. We have the rights to put it in contracts before the fact, and of course, it has to be something that is negotiated. This is a notice that is on the public-facing sam.gov website, just saying that. Go ahead, Derek. I can barely see it, but if you don't mind chiming in on there.
No, that's about as big as that's going to be, just as a reference point. That's what the link's for below, but that's about as much room in real estate that we have for that. It's just to highlight
Yeah.
what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, so, I'll say it again, it is not, October 1st is not fake news, it's not something that came out of thin air, it's not George trying to scare everybody, this is coming out of sam.gov. We're just making sure that everybody sees what the DoD has put out in the Federal Registry when they originally planned to implement NIST 100, I'm sorry, CMMC as a program. And even this thing is as of August 18th of 2025. And they are still saying that there's a possibility that CMMC will be effective and will become mandatory for a particular program in October. Granted, this is CMMC level 1, but the risk is there. The risk meaning you have to be focused, you have to be intentional, you have to make sure, affirming official, right, that you're understanding what you're affirming to. CMMC level 1, key takeaway there, you can't have poems. When your organization is reporting to those 15, 17 requirements, you have to be 100%. You have to be 15 out of 15, 17 out of 17, and that's always a different conversation. But the 15 FAR basic requirements have to be implemented within your environment. And as soon as you say yes in SPRS, or you reply to an opportunity within, who is this? I think it's the Air Force, I can't remember. Yeah, the Army Corps of Engineers. Now you have a digital footprint that opens up your organization to False Claims Act. So just be safe and be cognizant of what's happening.
Yeah, and so just to pause here briefly to the last two slides, the high level debrief there is 32 CFR had to exist for CMMC to become a program. So that had to be out there, and to make that so that 48 CFR can exist, which is then it can be required to have the contractors who are going to respond and bid and be awarded a level of certification. And we're going to get into some of the details there in a second as they roll into. So what George is highlighting there is that we're now in this, what they've been calling phased in implementation. That is what they've talked about from years ago to, they're kind of phasing out some of that stuff, but now they're phasing in. And we're going to talk about that now as we move forward to the next slide. So just if you have questions on that, again, as Chris has mentioned, use the Q&A. We can only answer what we can answer. We can't make up answers for the DoD or anything here, but use the Q&A, not the chat, and we'll get to some of those at the end.
So we're not doing that today, Derek. We're not making stuff up.
No, we're not going to make stuff up. We're
Okay.
going to continue to stay moral as a company as we always have, and not just make stuff up for people to then have cold sweats at night. So moving on to phased in implementation plan. This is a little bit of a recap too from November when we went through this, when George and I were walking through what the DoD has shared as their phased approach to phase in a full, and this is where I'm not a huge fan of implementation usage can be done wrong where it's not implemented day one, but they do have to phase it in. So it does not mean that wait until phase 4 is in completion to say it is now implemented. So be careful on that, which is why they put more clarity out like this. So 48 CFR is close, as we know. It has gone through the hurdles that it needs to, that we highlighted already, and anticipate, as George said, probably at some point in the Q4. There are still a lot of people obviously who are waiting for that final domino to tip over to start doing things. Is a very risky approach. You'll hear that from a lot of people in the industry. George already highlighted that in some cases the DoD may implement requirements in advance of planned phases. They too have to prepare. There is a program that exists. You can get certified now as a for using a C3PAO that effectively is now in place. You can do that. It's just not technically required yet, so that's good. But we want to highlight on one of the graphics that you're seeing here from the DoD. This is their graphic that we're highlighting, is kind of a little bit of a snapshot of where we were in November, kind of now where we are here, is that we're almost here. We're at the map at the mall, right? Where are you and where you need to go is that we are close to this. And the second part of that bullet there is the applicability to what will be required in your contract if you handle CUI or not, or CDI and CTI. That is going to be very impactful. Level one, federal contract information. George just talked about that stuff you can do now, but have that be something that you can respond to the day this comes into effect, because you don't need a third party to come in and validate that for you. So, George, can you talk a little bit about the use to make sure there isn't try our best to stop the misunderstanding of the words self-assessment and what the DoD has shared on what that means when you see 7021 in your contract once 48 is in effect.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Derek. When you see the opportunity or the option to self-assess, it's at least at a minimum you can self-assess, and it includes level one, right? Which is by definition, if you look at the CMMC assessment guide and scoping guide, it is labeled self-assessment guide because there's nobody else that is expected to come and do that third-party affirmation attestation, if you will, for a level one program. Then when you move to the level two, it will be very similarly to how we're seeing DFAR 7020 today. Or if you have been subject to a DIPCAC high assessment, very similar. You're expected to have a self-assessment before you get a third party. So is that double check, that intentional and internal double check saying, yep, I have all my policies and procedures, and now I am ready to allow the DoD/DIPCAC and or a C3PAO to do a third party assessment. But when we look into the DoD, the CMMC specific program website, you'll see there that there's a document that talks about the CMMC level determination. And what the DoD has done there, it's absolutely adorable and brilliant. It says that if you have a CUI that falls under the DoD category grouping, that you are very likely going to need a CMMC level 2 third-party assessment. The reasons, and you have that slide there by chance?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's coming. We're gonna dive into
Okay.
that a little bit in some more detail. But so thank you for highlighting that, because that is, we're not gonna go through every single nuance of phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4 per se.
Yeah.
We are going to we're gonna show you again actual screenshots, which is a little bit of a recap again from before on what the DoD has said, and this is not us making up words than anything like that. This is their screenshot. So if we go from phase to phase, some things to highlight in here is and this, you'll get, everyone's going to have these slides, so you can read right through how they plan to do this. And I think everybody understands that you can't just jump into the deep end with some of this. It seems like it's taken a while, which it has in some cases, but in comparison to some other programs in the government, this has actually gone relatively fast in some areas. So, but they have to build the program. It has to be done so that people can succeed. It has to be done so that there aren't people making stuff up. So phase 1 will begin, as we just highlighted a little bit on. It will depend on some of the topics we're going to get to in a second here on what it is that you're going to be required to do. But as the same rule applies, waiting for that to be determined is risky. You can make assumptions if you already have current requirements in place. I know that's broken record, but understanding your contracts, understanding your pursuits, if you are looking at how to use this as a way to grow your business and work with new parts of the DoD or the government, that is going to come into play faster than I think people probably realize when DoD isn't the only one that's making CMMC mandatory in the future. There are other things, and we're going to briefly talk about that at the end too. So phase one here, George, anything to highlight that we haven't before we kind of skip through to what phase two language looks like, phase three and phase four?
Yeah, just the clarification that these slides and language is from 2020. So probably took the DoD a good 12 months at least, or on average likely, to get these things done. So you see that the complementary 48 CFR, it's something that the DoD has always intentionally know that they need to before CMMC can show in contracts. And also the example that I jumped into a little bit ahead of time, that is newer language. So as the DoD understands and anticipate their paperwork process, they inevitably are going to generate more documentation, more guidance, more instructions to ensure that we are prepared and prepare accordingly. And that's why I made the comment of the self-assessment. It's not going to be in this slides because this is again 4+ years old now, that language from the DoD, but some items and artifacts have been generated in between to ensure that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and to reiterate once again, CMMC is nothing more, I shouldn't say it like that, but it is a validation of by someone else, unless it's a self scenario, but anticipate it being somebody else saying, do you have the stuff in place? We need to prove that so that we don't have to ask all the time and get conflicting reports back through questionnaires. And like we said, in that previous slide, what it used to be was we're good, we're working on it. That's the whole point. So there isn't a whole shift of what needs to be done. It is just that someone else is going to look at that and tell you officially through a process that is defined by the DoD and the Cyber AB on how that has to go. So that's a important thing. So phase one is very important. That's what's coming. That's the first thing. And then but then just to talk about where that's going to go, because here we are 9 months later from when we talked about this before, how quickly that time goes. Imagine what 12 months, 24 months and stuff look like when it comes to those that are maybe in the middle of contracts now and then will be getting new contracts in 2 years. Maybe the renewal is later. Preparing for all of that is important, and it's not something obviously you want to put to the back burner. So some highlights, George, from phase two versus say what phase one looked like.
It's the same language, right, Derek? It's the DoD saying that we reserve the right to expedite, we reserve the right to include it in different contracts, depending on the criticality of those products and services that you're generating for the DoD. That will be your indicator. If you are very, very close to weapon systems and critical programs, things that in high heat go boom, technical term, then you probably can expect that you'll be required to have a CMMC level 2 third-party assessment. You know what you're doing for the DoD. Just be ready because it's in your best interest to do so. And same is true for level 3,
Yeah.
which is the one delta there. As your program becomes more critical and you're having that critical CUI supporting those critical programs and include high value assets as defined in CMMC level 3 and NIST 100-172, then you have additional requirements. And if we saw a lot of the language in the 32 CFR that talks about ensuring that we have programs that are dynamic to be able to support and survive dynamic threats, assume that those are the level 3 and those critical programs that will need a CMMC level 2. Once you achieve CMMC level 2, then DIPCAC will determine if your program is one of those level 3 has those level 3 requirements, and the DoD/DIPCAC will be performing those assessments.
Yep.
And DIPCAC only for now, as of
Yeah.
right now.
And this is something we still hear quite a bit, is a lot of focus from people trying to scramble, trying to plan out for the future, is we need to be level 3. We're going to need to be level 3. You have to be level 2 first. So they can't, the DIPCAT can show up from the Defense Contract Management Agency, can have their assessment team show up. I mean, they can ask questions and stuff, but you tread a little lightly on the idea of level 3, because you do need to have level 2 first. So
Yeah.
if you can't get level 2 because it doesn't exist yet or whatever, then just know that no one's going to be able to force you or hold that over your head for level 3. And you probably have stuff that are indicators that is probably where you're going to end up someday, but it's going to be pretty far and few between for the majority of the DIB for the foreseeable future.
And thank you, Derek. Real quickly, another thing, right? Because we've been fortunate enough to have a very, very, very large network and relationships. We know prime contractors that are working diligently to get that CMM to level 3. So if you're a second tier, uh, third tier subcontractor, feel free to ask up your chain, of your supply chain. Hey, what is the likelihood that the programs that I'm supporting for you today that are going to require CMMC level 3? And likely your prime contractor will be very relatively easily identified if you are a critical supplier in their supply chain, and if what they absolutely need to flow down, right? Because everything is terms and condition and flow down, and that's how you stop the bleeding and control the pain downstream. When they do that analysis, which we know that they do, and they understand that there's no way that I can remove XYZ from the terms and conditions, the flow down, the task orders, then they will make sure that you know and prepare for the CMMC level 3 if applicable. But always feel free to ask the question up the chain. Just be ready.
And we're not going to spend a ton of time on the next 2 slides, but it doubles down, as George said, language that's been there on how they plan to do this the next 12 months. The next 12 months does not mean it's getting kicked down the road for another 2 years or 3 years. So you can check these slides out after the fact. You can find this obviously online from what the program looks like that's now in place. So moving on from the phases, George, this is what we wanted to spend some time on. You kind of touched on this already a little bit because the question usually then does shift to how will I know now as I prepare my plan to be certified, whether I need to have a C3PAO or not, because that is a budget, that is an expense that does need to be applied to your program, your CUI program. There's been some confusion here. There's been some volleyballing balls back and forth over the net on what's going on. Talk a little bit about this again, using the DoD's slide as an example.
Yeah, like we mentioned, this is straight up out of the DoD's CMMC website, program website. And what the DoD tried to do here, and I think they did that pretty well, is helping you determine, am I going to need a CMMC level 2 third-party assessment? The first quadrant is saying if you have a CUI that falls under the NAR category that they call the Defense Organizational Index grouping, then you're going to need that CMMC level 2, as you see the block quadrant there to the right. What I thought was adorable here is that the DoD trying to say, hey, if you have any other CUI, if you have CUI that belongs to GSA or not my CUI type of game, then you don't have to worry about my CMMC requirements. But if you have D47012, right, that tells you that you're going to have that CDI, the covered defense information, the CTI, control technical information, and the likelihood that you have a DoD organizational index CUI, it's extremely high because that's what we care about, at least today. In the next 12 months, that's going to be a different conversation. Not too different, but somewhat different. But yeah, that's just about it, Derek. It's if you have D47012, that means that you have DoD CUI. If you have DoD CUI per this guidance from the DoD, then you need level 2 certification, which means it's not a self-assessment that is validated by a third party.
Awesome. Then the supporting graphic, I know hard to read for people depending on the size of your monitor right now with this presentation, but they do supply this slide as well to kind of break that down into a flow chart of how you can think through this. Again, I think George said it already. It's always good to ask questions upstream. If you're not sure, they're sending it to you. They're asking you to be in compliance with requirements. I know it's not that easy just to say, hey, explain this all to me, but do it. I mean, work through the details, understand the contract and the deliverables, and and work with expertise on this from the third party if you need to find outside resources, and ask the questions back and make sure you have that documented, because eventually everyone's going to need a C3PAO assessment, in the years to come. But out of the gate, again, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're controlling your flows and your data and where it's CUI and where it's not, the number one thing on this, as George was saying, just to kind of highlight again how you can look at this, is what he just said from the defense side of CUI. So okay, we have a few minutes left here. We're going to roll through a couple lessons learned scenarios here that are from firsthand from our side, from others that we're connected to throughout the network, just to try to maybe alleviate some of the pain there, try to help out before we get to Q&A. So we're going to jump into level 2 assessments that are existing today, that since 32 CFR had come out last December, that you people have been able to go through. I think the town hall from last week, I think they're doing 200 and some certifications a month, I think is the number, and increasing. So that's a lot more data sets than there were 12 months ago. So that's good. And let George kind of roll through some of the things that have very, very much popped up as critical when it comes to being assessment ready after you have implemented your requirements.
Yep. Well, if you can go to the next one. Scoping and asset categorization and boundary is still the biggest pain point, mainly because we don't know what is CUI, right? We continue to see that a gigantic opportunity comes to us, various pages, and it says this falls under CUI, but then there's a lot of verbiage that we know as contractors, some contractors that are not CUI, but don't have the ability to get clarity. And since we don't know what exactly falls under the CUI categorization or identifies as CUI in some, if not most contracts, then we are unable to do a meaningful asset inventory to determine, yep, that system has CUI because I know what is CUI, and therefore everything around it, I need to ensure that I scope correctly and descope as necessary. So that's still the biggest challenges that we have seen thus far. Documentation, and I think we said it several times there, documentation. That's intentional because what C3PAOs are looking for, and they have been looking for that since 2017, is are you writing down what you're going to do, and are you doing what you have written down and documented? And inevitably, you're going to have plans, policies, and procedures. And if your plan, your strategy says, I'm going to build a whatever program and I'm going to maintain it and enforce governance, of course, because that's the only way, the main way to make items and things sticky, and then a procedure to support that policy. If those 3 documents or more, depending on your organization, do not align with each other, there's going to be a problem. There's the good C3PAOs are going to triangulate between those artifacts and governance items and make sure that if you're saying we're doing reviews every 30 days, every 60 days, every quarter, all your documentation needs to support those statements. Do what you say what you're doing. The C3PAO selection, it's not one and the same. My goodness, I cannot emphasize that enough. That is a critical process. Make sure that you interview more than one C3PAO unless one comes to you recommended, and recommendations oftentimes have extreme amount of weight, right? I trust that Derek is going to recommend a good pizza place, right? So I am going to go to that one pizza place because Derek knows pizza and other things. He knows sports as well. But yeah, when you have recommendation, it's a lot easier. But if you have to start from scratch, make sure that you do your homework. Make sure that you look beyond that C3PAO that has been around for 20 years doing other assessment, right? If they're a CPA, if they have done FedRAMP, make sure that when you zoom in into CMMC, zoom in into their lead assessors, and to determine that yeah, these people have their stuff together, and therefore your process is going to go relatively smoothly, depending on, of course, your boundary and your documentation.
And on that, real quick, George, too, before we get into the next bullet, even when they're recommended, it's really good to ask why you recommend them, because The C3PAO marketplace over time was at least this was, I'm sure this was said out loud by the DoD and the AB at one point, was that they want the market to dictate what that costs in that time and that is going to look like from an expenditure. The process, we're going to talk about the CMMC assessment process in a second, but the C3PAOs are held to a standard that they have to follow. When things are shared that's not following the assessment process that they are supposed to be following can cause some ugly scenarios.
Yeah.
There are some very wide price differences between if you go get 5 quotes right now, you're probably going to see a pretty big variance in different size. So don't always necessarily select the cheapest one, because that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to go as efficiently as it can and vice versa. Now, over time, it should pretty clearly say, here's my scope. Here's everything I need to provide you a C3PO, a price of what it's going to take, when I can get on your schedule, how much time and effort I need, and you're prepared for an assessment. We'll go faster. Will be a better experience for you. But just a little bit of recommendations are great. If you can get 3 or 4 good recommendations from people, start with those, because the good ones do exist. There are going to be a lot of C3POs over the next 12, 24 months, and that market's going to find itself leveling out. We believe, we hope, in the next 12 months or so, next 12, 24 months.
And
So,
I'll add a little bit there,
Yeah.
Derek. Fortunately or unfortunately, I've been in this space for 5 years, like I mentioned. I've been a problem owner where I know I have to identify where is CUI and design those controls. And inevitably, I have had the opportunity to meet a lot of C3PAOs. I've interviewed, I've worked with, I've collaborated with a lot of C3PAOs. And to Derek's point, make sure that your requirements about selecting a C3PAO is not focused on the financials. Because I have had C3PAO come to us and say, hey, George, Derek, and Eric, we can do it for you guys for this number, south of what's reasonable. And there is no way that a team of 3 CMMC professionals and CMMC assessors, if they do their job, which is reading a whole bunch of documentation, system security plans are large, governance documents are large, then you have artifacts that you have to show and share with them. That's a lot of things to look at. When you do the math, you know that they're not doing their job. And what that means is risk to your organization. So please, please, please don't focus entirely on the cost, because that's a risk that's going to linger with you for 6 years. Remember, that evidence has to be stored and hashed, encrypted for 6 years. We'll go to the next one because I know we're running out of time.
Yep.
And then the assessment process goes back to the C3PAO. Make sure that they follow the assessment process. It is not that difficult. And when I say that, make sure that your C3PAO lead assessors follow the assessment process. Make sure that you, organization seeking certification or an assessment, that you're familiar with the CMMC assessment process. Just look at the table of content if you don't want to get deep and dirty into that documentation, and make sure that when they're talking to you, the C3PAO or that business development person from the C3PAO body, that they hit each one of those milestones, and how are they going to do those processes for you and with you.
Yep. And if you're talking to C3PAOs, and they're saying they can help you create your CRM, and then they can also assess you, hang up the phone, because they can't do that. So there's nothing wrong with working with C3PAOs to help you prep for assessment, maybe even implement some things, but they cannot then assess you. So if that is part of the scope, red flag. Okay, moving on, because we do want to get to some Q&A here. Next steps. And I apologize. I realized that the agenda slide did not end up in here. So people are probably saying, where are we going with this? I hate presentations that don't have agendas. That's on me. I'll own that one. Thanks, George. No, just kidding. So yeah, let's go into next steps. So before we get to Q&A, just to highlight some of the stuff on here we are coming up on Labor Day. The last quarter of this year is going to go quick, and it's going to be noisy. So what can we focus on? What can we share with the audience today, George, that people can focus on?
Yeah. Just the same thing as the things that we have identified as the biggest pain points. Between now and next time we meet again, identify your CUI. Challenge your contractors and prime contractors to identify it for you. You have every right to say, What is it that I'm supposed to protect? Is it going to be CUI basic versus specified? Meaning, does that CUI come with additional conditions like D47012, right? I will argue that D47012 is giving you CUI that is specified because it has additional specification, i.e., whenever you're using a cloud service provider, you have to have FedRAMP model or equivalency. You have to report any cyber incidents within 72 hours. Those are additional conditions above and beyond CMMC, I'm sorry, beyond NIST 100-171 and NIST 100-171 alpha, which again, if we look at it as a statutory requirement, that's why NIST 100-171 was born, was, hey, how are we going to protect this new thing that we call CUI when we give it to non-federal organizations and their systems? So specified versus basic has context. Make sure that you understand what that is. Next one, focus on security, and security always. Documentation will get you to compliance, right? We know what we are supposed to do. NIST 100-171. That is the baseline. If you want to go above and beyond, I'll invite you. Gosh, I will even help you. Call me, send me an email. But focus on security. If I implement this control, what is it that I'm mitigating as far as operational and legal regulatory risk? And then your documentation is what's going to help you validate and assure anybody that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And mock assessments. Partner with a good C3PAO. They will do the mock assessment and will be intentional about giving you the report that says met, not met. Anything beyond that is considered consulting, so they cannot do your assessment. There's value in having the same C3PAO do a mock and then do the actual assessment. There's some financial opportunities there for your organization. There's also value in getting a different C3PAO or lead assessor to do the mock versus the actual assessment. That way you have two perspectives. That way there's no collusion or agendas, right? And you're getting the best out of both worlds. And of course, that's if your budget permits it. And interview many C3PAOs, but don't go crazy with that. There's a lot of groups in LinkedIn and the Discord that will be more than happy to let you know what their experience has been with a C3PAO. Interview. That's pretty much what we have. Let's get questions.
This is a little teaser here for future webinars in the series that are coming up. So we didn't want to spend half this time talking about the impact of the FAR CUI rule, but there was, I think even as of earlier this year, I can't remember what happened, but there was an update there at the end of last year that will have some impacts in the future. So more on that to come in our future. If you have something you want to talk about now and you've got questions about that and that's on your radar, reach out. We'll have some contact information here in the next slide, and we can roll through that. All right, so we have 11 minutes left, so we can let people go on their way. I'm going to do the fun part of opening up the Q&A and see what sort of questions, George, I can pepper you with, and see if we can get you to sweat through your shirt and your blazer there. I have not looked at these yet, so I apologize if some of them are a little too technical, probably a little too specific to the question. Again, we can answer them after the fact. We can also, you can reach out. We can get those answered. There's a ATI email on here and the Beryllium Quick Track email as well. We had a question I saw on here regarding flow down language with MSPs who are not subcontractors but are the administrators of the IT system. This is a very, very, very big topic. Provide some clarity there, George, that you can from understanding.
So if you are the contractor, you have every right to flow down that requirement to anybody that wants to help you meet your intents and objective. If you look at NIST 100-171, NIST, even from the first version, has been intentional about calling out that most organizations will need an external or third-party organization to help them meet the security requirements. That's kind of a given in this day and world. And if you contract or identify your MSP to be critical to security and or compliance, again, you have every right to flow down their requirement. which is a shortcut for your terms and conditions, right? Hey, MSP, how are you going to help me meet this requirements? And I love the question because that's a layer that is often forgotten, even for large organizations. Hey, I have all these controls, but then when you look behind the curtain, the people that are maintaining your systems are either not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're logging in, bypassing multi-factor. If you have export controlled information, you have IT people that work out of Brazil, India, China, well, maybe China, etc. And yes, but you can flow it down. It's a terms and condition, and yes, they are going to be critical to your security and your compliance. Therefore, if they're going to move CUI from your environment, they today need to be CMMC level 2. If they are remoting into your environment and accessing the CUI, they have direct access. They now become a CUI authorized holder with direct or indirect access, and therefore now they have a responsibility to help you meet your regulatory and legal requirements and contractual requirements. I hope I answered that question, but we can go into more details later.
Yes, well, that was good. I'm answering some of these live as we go, so I'm not ignoring you or anybody. So I'll pop in another one here. So this one's good too. So we didn't really talk a lot about the FedRAMP side. So conflicting information per this question. Sorry, I should rephrase, that did not come from me. I have seen conflicting information. If we use cloud software, i.e. Microsoft, Google, will it need to be authorized FedRAMP moderate or high? There's equivalency and ready. We don't have enough time to walk through all of that right now, but and then the
Yeah.
cost differences would be substantial in that case, which is
Yeah.
true. Walk through that, George.
Yes, so like I mentioned a minute ago with the COI specified versus basic. If you have D47012, D47012 is very specific. If and when you are using a cloud service provider to process, store, or transmit CUI, it has to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. The GCC and GCC high comes from other requirements that have to do with how Microsoft for example, I cannot remember how AWS GovCloud has it worded, but Microsoft does not claim to be able to protect anything that is related to an ITAR product if it is not GCC high. So Microsoft has those requirements. They reserve the right to do so as a company that has to manage and maintain a program and a set of people in the back end to support that. But yes, GCC today, it's okay for CUI basic. As soon as you get into export controlled data per the beautiful table that Microsoft has, you have to move into the GCC high. In short, if you have CMMC NIST 171 requirements, you can do just quote unquote GCC. Now it's your responsibility to go beyond that. Pricing, it depends on who's delivering for you, who's reselling things for you. And that's another of those solution selection exercises. I hope I answered that.
No, it's great. So the question, which I think it just disappeared on me, I didn't mean to hit that button. Where did it go? I hit that. I wanted to answer it live as a reminder, and somehow I seem to have. Okay, this is a good one too, and it sounds like there's more. I think there's more guidance coming on this, but after you set your policies and obtain CMMC level 2 certification, you are likely to find things that you want to change. How do you make adjustments to your policies and maintain your effectiveness and not put your level 2 certification at risk? That is an excellent question.
Yes, so there is language today in 32 CFR about what's considered a significant change that will require recertification. So if you're updating policy, i.e. administrative controls, the likelihood that you'll have to do a reassessment is extremely low. If and when you're changing the boundary, you're retiring large security protection assets from your security program, then you likely are affecting and getting into what is considered a significant change. But yeah, if you go to 32 CFR and you search, I think it was recertification when I found it, you'll see the language there. Joint venture is one of those things that falls under the recertification criteria. Also, if and when the DoD and the C3PAO disagree on the scoring, the DIPCAC will likely come and reassess in those scenarios as well. But nonetheless, that is language that is in 32 CFR, so there's nice guidance there already.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a good one too. We wanted to ask, what point does a dual use company, I guess it would need to implement CMMC level 2 solely based on the solicitation requirements? And this can get a little, it depends,
Yes.
but can you walk through
I'll
some
do a
common
very high
scenarios
level
there?
on that one because of that. So dual use, it's complex. Likely will fall on the ITAR products and EAR, which again, if you do a search on 32 CFR and you look for ITAR, you will see explicit language that says the CMMC ITAR is out of scope of the CMMC program because there's additional conditions, additional requirements that are already managed by a different authority body. So for dual use, Derek and I like to respectfully exit this stage for those items because we're not ITAR, expert controlled, EAR, and all that goodness experts there. So unfortunately, as of right now, look for the requirement in your government program, government contracts. And then, as you know, one of the things that I know from living in the DoD space for forever, and even when we get into the FAR program, when the CUI goes at the agency level, look for the most stringent and strict requirement. ODP, right? It's one of those things, the organizationally defined parameter. If the DHS is saying to report 8 hours, report incidents within 8 hours, and the DoD says 72, your program has to account for the one that is the most demanding, and inevitably you will meet the other requirements anyways. All that just to say that if your dual use, your EAR, ITAR products and services falls under a more strict rule, then go for those. But likely CMMC is not going to be the one at the one certification that's going to answer everything. Good, tricky question.
Yes, good, tricky question. A couple minutes left. This one's a good question, and we can't really answer it, unfortunately, but I will give the answer that is worth noting. Is that what's the approximate cost for CMMC 2.0, but in this case, CMMC certification for a small business with fewer than 5 people. So the reason I want to highlight this one is the cost of certification is different than the cost of implementation of what you're required to implement. So I want to make sure those are two different things. As I answered with some other ones, and I answered some of these live, we did talk about this in the presentation. If you're a small company, truly small company with five individuals, or less, or 10 or less, or whatever, your cost of implementation is 100% dependent on your workflows and what approach you take, whether you use a third party enclave like QuickTrack, which is what we do, or you build it in-house, or you have an MSP manage it for you and they build it for you. All impacts your implementation costs. The cost of certification will be really dependent on your assessment objectives that make up the NIST 171 alpha, and there's 110 controls. We didn't talk about this today, but that's 110 controls of NIST 171, 320 assessment objectives. That's what's being assessed. If your responsibility matrix, depending on the approach that you took, has less assessment objectives, by nature, it should take less time to be assessed on those customer responsibilities versus vendor responsibility or third-party responsibility. If you have all of them all in-house, it's going to take longer. Locations matter. Where your CUI is digitally versus physically matters. I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but I wanted to highlight the fact that the cost of certification should be treated differently on a line item than the cost of implementation of the requirements. So that hasn't changed.
Just one thing there,
Yeah,
the implementation, it is something that is allowable. We've been hearing this since day one, that is allowable under general and administrative. So find opportunities to recover the implementation. And then the C3PAO really quickly, it depends on your scope. So if you don't have to print, don't print. If you don't have to have hard copy CUI, don't have hard copy of CUI. And that simplicity will translate into savings for your organization. Thank you, Derek.
Yeah, and we are at time. There are some really good questions in there that look a little particular to that company. We're happy to answer those after the fact and do that privately, right directly to you. If there are questions that were submitted today that we feel are very useful to have answered, specifically sourcing to where that answer comes from. So it's not just Derek and George and our team making stuff up. We can provide that too. We have done that in the past. So thanks again, ATI, for having us on. Thanks everybody for attending, and there'll be more to come. I'm going to pass it back over to Chris for a wrap up, and we'll make sure we see everybody next time.
Thank you, Derek and George, and thank you everyone for joining. We will be posting the recording of this webinar in the coming days on the webpage that I linked. Additionally, the slides are available for your review right now. Additionally, as we go through the Q&A, or if we'll be posting that Q&A on that webpage as well. So again, thank you for joining and have a good rest of your day.